I took a big risk and shifted a lot of my chips to the middle of the table by picking Penn State to beat Ohio State 34-20. And I bet on James Franklin, not literally, but in the sense that I picked him. I picked him to win. And I picked him to beat Ryan Day, who he has never beaten in his head coaching career, and who he has never really come close to beating if you watched every Ryan Day versus James Franklin matchup that they have had. I mean, in 2019 and 2020, were those games really close? No. In 2021, Ohio State was always one step ahead. In 2022, Penn State took the lead in the fourth, but then Ohio State put their foot on the gas and the game was over pretty quickly. In 2023, once again, one step ahead of Penn State. In this game, Penn State had a 10-point lead. They had a nice drive, which ended in a field goal, chewed up a lot of clock. They got a pick six where Zion Tracy read Will Howard like a book. They set an attendance record. The environment, like I said in one of my videos previewing this game, a video giving reasons why Penn State can win, the environment was louder, I think, than typical Penn State noon games. It felt as loud as the whiteout. It felt as intense as, to me, the Michigan-Ohio State game, at least in terms of the crowd. But then Ohio State went on a 20-3 scoring run. Penn State had multiple failures in the red zone. Penn State had more penalties. Penn State couldn't get anything going downfield consistently. And Ohio State called the better game on both offense and defense. And really, for the cherry on top, performed better on special teams. Ohio State beat Penn State 20-13. And I shifted my chips to the middle of the table. And I said that in the preseason when I made this pick. And I said that this week, or now last week, when I made the prediction that Penn State would win. And I was wrong. So we're going to talk about it, just like how I talk about things, whether I am right or wrong. We're going to react to this game. I'm going to give you my analysis here. I think there's a lot to unpack, and things that are encouraging for both teams moving forward, and even discouraging for both teams moving forward. But let's dive in, and before we do so, if you wouldn't mind, please hit that subscribe button. Also, click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we release new college football content, and when I do a giveaway back to you all for helping us to reach 20,000 subscribers and becoming the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. We will be doing a giveaway at the end of the regular season, and we want to become the best college football channel on YouTube, and only you can help us do that by subscribing to the channel, hitting the notification bell, liking the video, sharing this channel around to others who you know enjoy the sport. Also, comment your reaction to this game down below, because there's probably something that you saw that I may have missed. And join our Discord server, where we are active and talk college football 24/7, especially on Saturdays. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, my Patreon page and merchandise store, the links to those, along with the Discord server, are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. You can sign up as a member on the Patreon page or purchase merchandise from my merchandise store. Thank you very much, and let's continue, because we have a lot to talk about here in relationship to a matchup that was top four. Penn State previously ranked third, Ohio State previously ranked fourth. We had a shakeup a bit in the rankings as expected, and even if Penn State won this game, Ohio State would have fallen outside the top five. Penn State may have moved up to number 2, because Georgia, who is now number 2, did incur a loss a few weeks back to Alabama. But let's look at the basic statistics here, get those out of the way, and then get to my takeaways. Ohio State averaged more points per play and more yards per play. And while they did technically lose the turnover battle, it was more so even, if I'm being honest. You know, Penn State had the pick six that they got, and then they had that passive fumble recovery because Will Howard fumbled it into the end zone. Counts as a touchback. Penn State got the ball back. But Penn State threw a critical interception before halftime. And they also had that failed fourth down conversion where Ohio State had that goal line stand. So really, in totality, that's 2 turnovers for both teams. If I tell you that Penn State's 1 of 2 on fourth down, Ohio State's 1 of 1 on fourth down, Penn State throws a pick, Ohio State throws a pick six, and they also fumble it out of the end zone, you probably think this is pretty much a coin flip game. But then I tell you that Ohio State averages more yards per play, and not just more yards per play overall. They average a half yard more per pass attempt and nearly a full more yard per rush attempt. And I also tell you that they win the points per play margin with a 0.062 points per play margin. Penn State has a negative 0.062 points per play margin. Then you tell me, yeah, Ohio State wins. They probably cover. It's probably a close game that very much resembles the 2023 contest. And I think that is kind of what happened. This reminded me a lot of last year's game, except you give Penn State some insurance early instead of letting them not backdoor cover, because Ohio State still covered last year's spread, but they make the score look more respectable than it actually was. They had a garbage time touchdown last year where but Drew Aller hit Caden Saunders in the end zone for a touchdown. By the way, Penn State didn't score a single offensive touchdown in this game. If I tell you that, you know Ohio State's winning. Ohio State scored 2 offensive touchdowns. Penn State scored 0. Their one touchdown was a defensive pick 6. And again, a beautiful play by Zion Tracy. Penn State really wasted all of that momentum. All of it just circled down the drain. And it felt like that was going to be the case early in the second quarter, late first quarter. Very early on after the pick 6, it felt like Penn State had an opportunity to take over the game and really make it ugly. And in a different universe, maybe that happens, but we're not talking about hypotheticals here outside of really the future or some things that could be encouraging or discouraging for the winner and the loser respectively. We're talking about what actually happened, and what actually happened is that Ohio State was the more disciplined team. They were the more efficient team. They were the more battered team and bruised and injured and hurt team, but they were better coached. They understood their roster better, and they put themselves in a better position to win. The result here is the epitome of the fact that Ryan Day is a top 5 coach and James Franklin's not even top 10, probably not even top 15, maybe not even top 20, especially when you look at game management and when you look at building a championship roster. Ohio State had 2 turnovers. Penn State had 1. Ohio State in totality was 7 of 14, 50% when you look at third and fourth down conversions combined. Penn State was 4 of 13, just under 33% of their conversions. I tell you that, there's confidence that Ohio State's going to win. And Penn State had some disastrous penalties, like the one where they got an unsportsmanlike, which extended the Ohio State drive instead of punting the ball back to Penn State. 5 penalties for 45 yards. Ohio State only had 2 penalties for 15. They had an offsides, and they had a defensive holding. That was it. And Davison Igbinosun, who I think is a pretty undisciplined corner overall, he made up for that defensive holding by making an amazing play off of Harrison Wallace's mistake, where he dropped what was, I think, a beautiful pass by Drew Aller in the end zone. It was a bunch of little things that all snowballed into an Ohio State victory. Ohio State won the battle of little things, and they didn't lose the battle of big things either, and therefore the game snowballed in their direction, and they came out with a huge win, a big win. And we're going to get to Ohio State, because we saved the best for last, but I want to touch on Penn State first, and then get to the Buckeyes here. Penn State they blew this game, and it was something that Tom Fornelli said on Cover 3, where if Penn State didn't win this game, when are they going to beat Ohio State? Now, from here on out, Penn State, Ohio State, if it wasn't already this, in my mind, it wasn't exactly this. But now I'm close to a point where I'm thinking I'm not going to pick Penn State to beat Ohio State again. Eventually it will happen. It will. It just will. Penn State's too talented of a program, too valued of a program, too good of a program to lose to Ohio State for 50 or 40 or even 30 years straight. They may not even lose to Ohio State for 20 years straight. Ohio State loses a lot after this year. Penn State doesn't lose as much, and as I've documented, they've recruited better than Ohio State at a very important position, the offensive line. So maybe they beat Ohio State and Columbus next year. Maybe, depending on what happens, of course. But would I pick it right now? No. If these two teams rematched, and I'm someone who still has some optimism in Penn State, would I pick Penn State to beat Ohio State? No, of course not. Ryan Day put on a coaching clinic, and James Franklin showed you exactly what you don't do in these big games. That drive where he was mismanaging the clock on the 4th and 1, which Penn State converted, he was mismanaging that intentionally. That wasn't just a complete brain fart moment in the typical sense. It was a I'm so scared I'm about to poop my pants moment, because James Franklin didn't want Ohio State to get the ball back. He was not totally confident that his team could convert a 4th and inches, essentially, with the running backs, quarterback, and offensive line they had. And at that point, I and everyone else in the world, even Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles, should have realized then, oh yeah, Penn State's not winning. Because not only did they not have the roster that Ohio State did, and their rosters are closer than a lot of people say, in my opinion, but they didn't have close to the coaching capability, which we knew at the head coaching level was true entering this game. They also didn't have the confidence. Penn State was emotionally everywhere during this game. Early, they were very confident. They were tough. They were a bit too tough, in fact, to the point where they were a bit uncontrolled. That's what the unsportsmanlike penalty was. They were hitting hard. They were tackling hard. As the game went on, they were less and less and less confident. And on that final drive, the final drive of Ohio State, where they're running the ball down Penn State's throats, Penn State, they just quit. The defense quit. And that is a cultural issue. It straight up is. You have 4 more minutes and technically 4 timeouts with a 2-minute warning. Force Ohio State to punt the ball inside the 10. And Ohio State, they were running the ball effectively with some of their speed option stuff, but Penn State was doing a pretty good job of slowing down their rushing attack outside of those speed options. Get the ball back. And they didn't. They felt, after that missed 4th and goal opportunity, Penn State's roster felt that the game was over. And I get a feeling that James Franklin also then felt like the game was over. The Nittany Lions were 1 of 3 in the red zone, 33% red zone scoring percentage, and that one score was a field goal. They had 150 passing yards, 7.1 yards per attempt, 120 rushing yards, 3.8 yards per carry. And a lot of those yards came from Tyler Warren making an amazing play on 3rd down. That showed some of Andy Kotelnicki's amazing play calling. And the Nittany Lions had 3 sacks, 6 TFLs, and 1 pick 6, but Ohio State was able to get behind their defense in the passing offense, and Chip Kelly was out coaching Tom Allen for much of that game. And it could have been worse. If not for the pick 6, and if not for Will Howard fumbling out of the end zone, that's a 21-3 game at halftime, and that game's over. That game's over. And that's who Ohio State is, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. They are never going to play. This team will never, especially with Simmons out there, never going to play that perfect game that we've been accustomed to Ohio State playing at times under Day or under Meyer. Will Howard is who he is. The Will Howard that played against Penn State is the Will Howard that we saw at Kansas State, turning over the football, being a little bit loose, not being the most accurate, and Ohio State consequentially is going to make anywhere from probably 2 to 5 dumb decisions per game. They're never going to be a perfect team. They may not be a GOAT team. I'm saying maybe not because we've seen some teams in the past who are close to, if not in that greatest of all caliber team tier, and they compensate for some ineptitude at certain positions or some injuries or some limitations, and maybe Ohio State can do that, but I'll get to that in a few minutes. The point being, Penn State further blew it. Like, it could have been a lot worse if Ohio State didn't make those 2 turnovers 21-3, and the game's over at halftime. But Penn State was in the game, and they couldn't finish. They just couldn't finish. And the 2 red zone failures inside the 5-yard line are the epitome of that. If Penn State takes the lead entering half, they probably come away with a win that they don't get 9 out of 10 times if they play in a 10-game series, even in Happy Valley. Or if Penn State scores on their final red zone trip and make it 20-20. All the momentum's in Penn State's favor. Ohio State's offensive line before that final drive was beginning to crumble a bit, especially in pass protection. And they probably punt the football back, or they have to go down and get a game-winning field goal. And one of those teams wins 23-20, and that's the end of the game. Are they capable of beating a top 10 team? Is Penn State really capable of that under James Franklin? I don't know. The answer is probably yes, but it's a yes that is more so due to technical reasons than to reasons that are soaked in confidence. They're 3-19 versus top 10 teams and 1-10 versus Ohio State under James Franklin. They have never beaten an undefeated Michigan team or a top 10 Michigan team. And they have only once on a very fluky play, a blocked field goal returned for 6, which rarely happens, beaten a top 10 Ohio State team. Ryan Day owns James Franklin. And I never knew this before, but Jim Knowles apparently owns Andy Kotelnicki. Shut down his offense in 2021 with Oklahoma State, shut it down again in 2024 with Ohio State. And Penn State also, with the weaknesses they have at QB, Drew Aller, I thought, was improved compared to last season, but was he elite? That wasn't really proven up until this point, and now it's clear that he isn't. At wide receiver, Harrison Wallace III is a good player, but just a good player, and he made mistakes in this game, like where he didn't catch what I thought was a perfect pass that you could say cost Penn State the game, though there were other areas and people and more so coaches to blame. And the offensive line, this is a good O-line, but good isn't good enough. If Penn State maybe had Olu Oluwatimi or Josh Simmons or both, or a 22 Michigan, 23 Washington, 22-21 Georgia, 22-23 Oregon level O-line, well, maybe that series where they ran 3 times at the middle against Ohio State, that may have worked. Probably would have worked, depending on which of those O-lines you selected. But it didn't, because Penn State doesn't have that. They're oh so close, but oh so far. And it's the same as it ever was for Penn State and James Franklin. But the season's not over. Penn State could win out, and they have to win out if they want to reach the playoff, if they want to win a big game, if they want to win anything of significance. Without serious chaos, they're out of the Big Ten title conversation. Their schedule's too weak. Ohio State is the head-to-head win over them. Indiana right now is undefeated and will probably only lose to Ohio State, and Oregon's probably winning out at this point. So they needed this win if they wanted to win the Big Ten or compete for winning the Big Ten in the championship game. But if they win out, they're in the playoff, probably hosting a playoff game, which would be very winnable. Penn State's home field advantage is massive. Ohio State could be the number 1 team in the country, and therefore Penn State could have nearly beaten the number 1 team in the country. And they're probably not going to face the number 1 team in the country if they're hosting a playoff game in the first round. Like, they're probably not going to be initially playing that team. So there's massive opportunity for Penn State, and I think they have to work in Bo Prabula, who only had like 5 snaps in this matchup, and the wide receivers more. And they have to also hope that the house favors their hands. Penn State received a lot of unfavorable play calls in this game. I thought Ohio State got away with some holding, got away with some defensive pass interference, and other things too. But I also know Penn State probably got away with some things as well. The point is that they have to hope that maybe in a game in the playoff, whether it's the first round or not, and even if they make it, that the referees are all betting on Penn State, or they all love Penn State, and it's like the most egregious thing that we've seen all year. Or you have to hope that a team doesn't play their A-plus game, because at this point, Franklin's not winning a big game until he proves otherwise. That's the point I'm trying to make. I'm not saying that there was anything unfair that happened to PSU or anything like that. What I'm saying is Penn State needs something to fall their way in a big way if they want to win one of these big games, unless Franklin has some type of breakthrough coaching performance. I mean, Drew Aller at a QBR of 29.2. Penn State only had a total of 3 receptions committed by wide receivers. The other 10 were by Tyler Warren and Nicholas Singleton, who led the team in receiving yards. It's not a good look. And Tyler Warren led the team in rushing yards. Drew Aller was second in rushing yards. Singleton and Allen never averaged more than 2.5 yards per carry. through the whole game. So a lot is to change, especially on offense. And I'd say work in Pribula and those wide receivers more. Because Pribula has something that Aller doesn't. Pribula has a lot of mobility. And that really fits with what Andy Kotelnicki wants to do. But that's all I have to say for Penn State here. Let's move on to Ohio State. Ohio State has one of the best head coaches in the country in Ryan Day. He's 63-9 overall with a 42-4 record in Big Ten Conference play. And he's 8 of 8 against end-of-season top 10 FPI teams. Would be 7-8 if I didn't include this Penn State team, but I'm confident this Penn State team is better than Tennessee. And Penn State's 11th in FPI right now. So I think Penn State's going to finish stronger than Tennessee is, could finish stronger than other teams that are ahead of them in FPI. I think Penn State finishes in the top 10 of FPI this season. Against top 10 power-rated teams, Day is 500. Do you know how hard that is? It's very, very challenging. Now, if you move up to top 5, Day is a losing record. But again, it's hard to have a winning record against top 5 opponents. And something that I have grown tired of throughout this season in particular is the amount of criticism. Not criticism as in he should have made these moves, or you maybe tweak something, or why did you manage the game against Oregon improperly at the end. Not that. I'm talking about people saying that he should be fired, which was lunacy. It was always lunacy. Even if Ohio State went 9-3 this year, which at this point isn't happening unless they lose in some embarrassing way to Purdue, Northwestern, and Michigan in addition to Indiana, even if they went 9-3, he wouldn't be fired. He might be on the hot seat entering next year. But with the success that he's had, the talk about firing him was always idiotic. Always idiotic. And while I can say that I don't like when I'm wrong, and I was wrong about picking this game, something that's very satisfying is the fact that all of these people who were saying that this guy was not cut out for the job, that, oh, if we just had Urban Meyer, we'd have won like 4 natties, which no, and if in fact you would have lost more games than you have under Day so far, is that now those people are singing Ryan Day's praises, or at least pretending to, as they should. Because Day could be the best head coach in college football right now. Ohio State's better than Georgia. Georgia looks lost. Their quarterback does not know how to read a defense. At least Will Howard knows how to read a defense and read it quite well, in fact. He makes some Heisman-worthy plays. Carson Beck has not been anything close to a Heisman-worthy quarterback this year. Not even close. Georgia has struggles at wide receiver. Their defense, while good, I think it has a bit too many holes to be elite. I mean, Florida was able to get points on them. That's gross. That's very gross. And I look at a game like this. It's another top 10 win for Ryan Day, a top 5 win if you count by current ratings, or rankings, which I typically don't like to do that. But hey, I thought Penn State was top 5 entering this game. I'm going to give credit where it's due. And as I've said over and over again, Day is a near elite to elite head coach, and anyone who ever thought he was not a top 10 head coach was not being objective. It's just a fact. And as I tweeted out before this game, whether Ryan Day wins or loses, he's still a top 5 head coach because of the resume that he has. And also because if Penn State was going to win this game, they were going to be one of the best teams in the nation. They could still be one of the best teams in the nation. I mean, think about it. If the red zone goes differently and they score some touchdowns on some of those long drives against this Ohio State defense, who's filled with NFL talent, the narrative is that Penn State can win the Natty now, that they can score on any defense, that they can, not control the game, but that they can at least dictate the pace such that they're not put at a disadvantage against anyone in the country. That would be the narrative. But Ryan Day instead spun the narrative around the other way, the way that it's been. And that's a credit to Day, who 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and now 24. He's 6-0 against James Franklin, against a school that is of blue blood caliber in Penn State. 6-0. Even with all the issues that Ohio State has this year, that they had last year, that they've had in prior seasons, 6-0, undefeated. And a 500 record against end-of-season top 10 FPI teams. And we can dive deeper into his resume and into his overall record and all these different things. I mean, take, for example, a third of his losses, 20 Bama, 22 Georgia, 23 Michigan, are the greatest of all time caliber teams. 3. You look at 19 Clemson. You look at 22 Michigan. You look at this year's Oregon team. Another third of his losses are to elite teams. Over 50% of Day's career losses are to teams who, on a objective level, taking into several factors into account, are elite, that are some of the nation's best. And of course, you want to win a national title. You don't want to miss the Big Ten championship game or miss out on a Big Ten title for 4 years in a row. But the Big Ten's getting tougher. It's way tougher now, and even in the past few seasons, than it was when Urban Meyer was there. It's tougher. I mean, Michigan, for a while, was back. Penn State now is kind of at a constant position that it was under Urban Meyer's second half of his tenure. Oregon's joined the conference. Washington and USC are historically good programs. I mean, you look at, there's just so many things. I mean, even Maryland. Maryland is no longer a cakewalk like it was from 2014 to 2018. They actually had some good teams in 2022 and 2023 that competed with Ohio State, but Ohio State beat them and beat them by double digits. And this also goes to the point that, while I've criticized Ohio State's assistant coaches, I don't think this game should be indicative that, Justin Frye should have his job saved, because there were a lot more things than the offensive line that helped Ohio State win, mainly the defense, the defensive line, and that relates to Jim Knowles. And Jim Knowles and Chip Kelly called a better game than Andy Kotelnicki and Tom Allen did. It wasn't just the fact that Day is the better head coach than James Franklin, not just in game management, but also in hiring coordinators. Again, I think there needs to be some assistant changes for Ohio State if they want to reach their potential, like on the offensive line, which is still a major handicap. I mean, that makeshift O-line is good for a makeshift O-line. But throughout the game, Penn State began to figure that out. And that's why Chip Kelly was running those speed options and purposely running it to the side where Penn State had no players on, because Penn State was running man coverage for the entire game. Ohio State was gaining outside leverage and testing outside leverage for the whole game, because if they were going to play the inside game, they were not going to maximize their chances to win, because that offensive line is not an elite O-line, not without Simmons. But the coordinators called a fantastic game. That relates back to Day hiring them, making those choices, him letting them do their thing. And look, when you look at the coordinators and the head coach, this may be the best staff on a week-by-week basis when it comes to preparing for games. I mean, Ohio State, their scripted drives and their drives where they adapted were awesome. I mean, they were able to move the ball down the field on a defense that is a top 5 defense, I would say, nationally. They were able to move the ball. They were able to confuse the defense. They were able to convert reliably on third down, pick up first downs through the run, through the air. It was a good game by Ohio State's coordinators, by their head coach, and also by their players. It was a very good game by the players. They are just good enough to be number one in a year that I have said since the beginning, due to a lot of elite quarterbacks from last season leaving and all of the transfer portal use and all the conference realignment being a down year. Now, sometimes people get annoyed when I say a down year, but by down year, I don't mean in terms of quality. This is a more entertaining season, I think, overall than 2022 was, and could be still more entertaining than 2023 was. In terms of upsets, it's certainly more entertaining than 2023 was. What I mean by a down year is you don't have a greatest of all time caliber team. All the national champions, 2014 Ohio State and 2023 Michigan included, I think would beat any of these teams by double digits. And those games would be over in the fourth quarter. None of these teams, from what I see, outside of maybe Oregon, but they're beatable, and maybe this Ohio State team, if they can find ways to improve, and maybe Texas, if they can get the Quinn Ewers of earlier in the year and get their offense figured out, are not even close to the teams of the prior seasons who won the national title or who even made appearances in the 4-team college football playoff. But under these circumstances, in this season, Ohio State's just good enough to be number one. And that's all you can ask for, because that means they can win it all. They can win the Big Ten. They can win out. No one will be complaining about a 15-1 record. No one. No one at all. Certainly not Ryan Day. Certainly not any logical fan. Probably no fan. They're the number one team. They won several playoff games in a row in that scenario. And this team proved that this past Saturday, yesterday, by going on a 20-3 run after trailing 10-0, and after having a very angry fan base who's desperate for a win and one of the nation's better defenses hang a 10-point lead on them. They had 182 passing yards, nearly 200, against a defense that allowed less than 10 yards per pass attempt, well under 10 yards per pass attempt. I think it was 5.5 yards per pass attempt before this Saturday, and around only 10 yards per completion, which is very impressive. And they averaged 7.6 yards per attempt. And they finished with 179 rushing yards, and they averaged 4.7 yards per carry. And before that final run, they were still averaging 4.5 yards per carry because of some of those speed options, some of those good calls by Chip Kelly. They used misdirection for much of the entire game. And I thought to myself in watching Ohio State film on Friday, that's the way they're going to win, is they can't just call runs up the middle or rely solely on their athleticism to beat up on Penn State. They could do that, and to a large degree they did do that in this game, but they would really have to scheme. They'd have to scheme things in order to win, and they did. They did. And the offensive line, well, it didn't play great. They didn't play terribly either. They didn't fold. There were several plays where they were pushing Penn State around. There were several plays where they were able to lock up Penn State's pass rushers. There were other plays where Donovan Jackson got destroyed by Abdul Carter, or other plays where Penn State just completely pushed over their O-line, but it was a battle. It wasn't a one-sided matchup. It was even, and Penn State having one of the better defensive fronts in the country, that's a compliment to Ohio State's offensive line. They're just good enough to be number one. The Buckeyes are, and they move on to 7-1 in Big Ten Conference play. They are 4-1 with 4 Big Ten games left. All those games except for Northwestern are at home, including the Indiana game, which is going to be a key matchup because I think it's obvious right now that Indiana is the most efficient team in the Big Ten relative to talent and the fact that they haven't played anyone close all season long, even against Washington when they had Taven Jackson in as their quarterback and kind of looked a little disinterested. So I'm very excited to see how Ohio State pans out for the rest of the year, and same with the Big Ten, which is really now down to, in terms of Big Ten championship teams who can win the conference, Indiana, Ohio State, and Oregon. And in terms of the college football playoff, you can't forget about Penn State either. You can't. I mean, don't view them as the favorite because of their head coach and some of the issues they have. But if this is the year, and what happened yesterday was just an example of Ohio State's a better coach team and they have more athletes and Penn State played to their floor, you got to pay attention to the Nittany Lions still. So that's all I have to say in reaction to this game. And last but not least, Caleb Downs is the MVP here. 4 tackles, 4 solo tackles. He didn't get burned at all. Was barely on the screen in the sense that they didn't target him because he was winning all those matchups with Tyler Warren and anyone else he was covering. And he also made some key tackles, constantly getting in run defense plays and just stepping up in every way. He is one of their best players, potentially their best player on the field. And what Ohio State has done through developing their roster, selectively using the portal to get better players, I mean, it's what you should do. That's the win. That's the secret sauce to winning in the portal era. You recruit well out of high school, you develop, and you also get some guys via the portal to further upgrade your roster, to raise your floor, and also, especially with a player like Caleb Downs, to raise your ceiling. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Connor OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I will see you all soon. Go Nittany Lions and go Buckeyes.